Hi, my name's Bob Greene. I teach history here at Cazenovia College, and I'm the college archivist. And today what I'd like to do is to talk to you a little bit about the history of Cazenovia College, Cazenovia Seminary before it became a college. My view as a historian of any institution, whether it's IBM or Cazenovia College, is that it's an entity. It's almost like a person. It begins in a state of infancy, then it grows through to adolescence. Then it comes out, hopefully, as an adult, strong and vibrant. So I've called this a brief biography of Cazenovia College. And I want to start it in 1795 with the founding of the village of Cazenovia by John Linkland. In 1810, Cazenovia became the county seat of Madison County, and the courthouse was built in Cazenovia. And that courthouse would become the seat of what would first be called the Seminary of the Genesee Conference of the Methodist Church. The Methodists were looking to establish a school for their youngsters, grades 1 all the way through 12. And the courthouse would make for a perfect building if they could buy the courthouse, which they did in a poker game, I understand, for about $100. And the deed went over to the Methodist Church, and in December of 1824, the Seminary of the Genesee Conference opened, with classes being held in the basement of that institution. From the start, and one of the things that made the seminary unique, special, and at one point in time singular in the United States, was that it was coeducational. Now, in my history classes, I'm prone to saying that statistics are incredibly boring, and I try to avoid them at all costs. But here's a few that I think are necessary to put this into some context. The first class, the charter class of the seminary, were 8 males. All of them were between the ages of 8 and 12. And those 8 males, by the end of 1825, had been joined by several women. We're not sure exactly how many, but by the end of the first year, women had been admitted as students. Obviously, it was to grow. By 1841, the graduating class consisted entirely of 28 women. And over the first 50 years of the history of the seminary, out of the 12,000 students who attended, approximately 4,000 of them were women. This put the seminary into the vanguard of coeducational institutions around the country. In 1873, after the Civil War, the seminary changed its name. It actually went through 7 or 8 name changes to the Cazenovia Seminary. It was still affiliated with the Methodist Church. If you're familiar with what we call the front shot of the college, this is the shot on Seminary Street, where you would look at Eddy Hall with all of the smokestacks there because it was a dormitory. And Tower Hall on the right, that's the entrance to the bookstore, which I'll show you another picture of in just a few moments. What was it like to go to the seminary at the turn of the century? Well, they had some rules and regulations which I actually kind of like. This is from the 1895 seminary catalog, the list of prohibitions. You couldn't have games of chance, use of intoxicating drinks, no profane or obscene language, no smoking or chewing tobacco on the premises, no clamorous noise in or about the seminary. You couldn't frequent bar rooms, and you couldn't have groceries, or you couldn't visit billiard halls. I never have figured out the one with the groceries. And no secret societies or combinations of students. Real easy life back in 1895. This institution began to change by the 1930s. In an effort to get more students, and again, it stayed grades 1 through grade 12. If you're familiar with the movie, think Dead Poets Society. It was that type of an institution. But we were losing students by the 1930s because of the Depression. And so in an attempt to get more students in, we added a college prep department to the seminary. And that college prep department taught some college courses, but its goal was not now just to graduate students from high school, but to get them into one of the top 3 institutions of higher learning for the Methodist Church on the East Coast: Wesleyan University, Duke University, or Syracuse University. And by 1934, the seminary was solely college prep. It was beginning to phase out grades 1 through, I think it was about 10 or so, and keep students who were just coming there to get college prep. But the Depression took even more of a toll as it got into the early 1940s. And the trustees had to make a couple of moves to make sure that the institution would stay solvent. In 1941, they severed their relationship with the Methodist Church so as not to have to pay money to the church anymore. And that didn't solve all the problems, but Pearl Harbor brought a major change. The beginning of World War II forced the hand of the trustees, and they made 2 other significant changes. They closed the college prep and made it a junior college, a 2-year college, and made it then in 1942 a junior college for women. This turned out to be a significant error in planning. What they couldn't see in 1942, because it hadn't come around yet, was the GI Bill. And the fact that GIs were going to come home from World War II with a significant amount of government funding in their pocket. And the government was going to pay for them to go to school. Where did they go in the area? Thousands of them in uniform went to Syracuse University. And because the Cazenovia Seminary had become Cazenovia Junior College for Women, we had, according to our records, 3 men between 1942 and 1982 who went part-time to the institution. That was a significant loss of funding. This is Tower Hall, and Tower Hall is effectively, as you saw a moment ago, that big open door. That's the entrance to the bookstore, approximately now, and up above it was the chapel. Why isn't it there now? Well, in 1947, we lost a significant portion of Callanan Hall on the right, which is where Hubbard Hall stands today. In between, if you're giving yourself a little bit of location here, in between the car and the burned out building of Callanan Hall on the left is the Baptist Church. And almost 12 years later, the front portion of the college effectively was gutted by fire. That's Eddy Hall in flames up in the top right hand, what's left of Centennial Hall down in the bottom right. And on the left is the then president of Cazenovia College for Women, Junior College for Women, Rhea Eckel Hall here on campus, watching the burning of the front of the campus with members of the Morrisville and Cazenovia Fire Department. Let's not forget that there was a student life here on campus in the 1950s and 1960s that was in a lot of ways different from what you might think of when you think of college in the 50s and the 1960s. For all intents and purposes, the upheavals of the late 1950s and 1960s passed Cazenovia College by. It was an institution of higher learning for young women with traditions that are revered by our alumni now. For example, the tradition that mandated that freshmen wore a beanie, a little hat, all the way through their freshman year, or bad things would happen to you or something. And freshmen and sophomores both wore blazers. The beanies and the blazers were worn to class and to virtually every other significant function. Some people see that as conformity. Some people see that as a revered tradition. A lot of people like to criticize women's education at the time. Some of them point to the May Day celebration. Yes, those are college students, and yes, that is a maypole on the quad. But this was a bonding experience. Alumni have told us that this was one of the, and it led to the crowning of the May Queen. You can see the May Queen in the back left of that photograph. That this led to a bonding for young women that wasn't available to them in any other kind of education. And they look back on the all-women's educational experience as a significant moment in their lives. And it was a transitionary moment as well, because the college, the junior college, was not just offering classes that would transfer to a four-year institution. And they weren't just offering the opportunity for young women to learn social graces so that they could go out and marry a rich individual, although both of those were part of women's education. But Cazenovia College for Women was, again, singular in that they were one of the first institutions in the country to begin to offer courses that would lead to the possibility of careers for women. Big in secretarial, one of the first in human services, one of the first to offer a two-year degree in equine studies, and one of the first to offer a two-year degree in general business for women. So it was a transitionary period. The period of the fire, the bills that had to be paid, the fact that by the mid-1960s a significant number of women were walking away from women's colleges, led to a financial crisis that came to a head in May of 1974. On May 16, 1974, the Board of Trustees voted to close Cazenovia Junior College. There's a myth out there that Cazenovia College closed, but it never did. And it never did for two reasons. The first was the students at the time. And as alumni, they've told us stories of going around around the village with empty cans, getting loose change, putting up signs like the one that you see here all over the village, and essentially becoming a force for their own survival. But the other portion of it was a committee from the village itself that undertook the financial restructuring of the college, a significant financial restructuring. The impact that this village has had on the survival of Cazenovia College cannot be overestimated. And it's an impact that isn't always evident in other relationships between larger institutions, even smaller institutions, and the community with which they live. It's not an exaggeration to say that Cazenovia College would not exist today were it not for the impact of the village of Cazenovia. That impact led to a strengthening during the 1980s, not just financially, but academically and socially as well, as two major decisions led to the strengthening of the college. The first, almost 50 years after the college went to single sex, we became coeducational again, as we are today. And I just kind of like this picture because I was there when this picture was taken. When the guys were picked up at the bus station and brought here to the college, some jokester stuck U.S. mail on the side of the van and got a picture. I don't know who did it, but we're forever in their debt because this is just a wonderful picture of men coming back on campus for the very first time since 1942. And in 1988, the decision that I personally believe put the college into the position of strength that it is today. In 1988, we decided to become a baccalaureate institution and grant four-year degrees for the first time in the history of Cazenovia Seminary or Cazenovia College. You can't talk about the present-day college, I don't think, without reminiscing about what happened on 9/11. The students came together in a way that I have not seen. I've been teaching at the college since 1979. And this coming together on the quad with the candles, in the ceremony, brought the students together in a bonding that might have been reminiscent in an interesting way of the bonding that the young women had back when it was an all-women's institution for a much more terrible reason. We were worried about what our students were doing who had family in New York, what our students were doing who wanted to run down to New York. Some of them did. They just simply left and we had no contact with them. It was a time when suddenly you felt what Cazenovia College could be, and when we talk about this place as a family, it was evidenced that night. So I can't really talk about too awful much more history, so rather than talk about what we are today, you can see it all around you, I brought some toys to look at. First one is, make sure I got this right side up, is from the class of 1895, and all the young women in the class of 1895 embroidered their names to give this to the dean. Presents for teachers. I'm all for it. This is the beanie that I referred to that was worn by all students, and I am not going to model it. The desperation of the moment, just a quick handwritten sign to stick up, there's still tape marks on it, in the windows downtown, prior to PowerPoint posters and everything else, but the need to get the student viewpoint out there is seen in these two handwritten posters which have survived. And a memento from another age. We have all these artifacts and more, along with the records of the college, in the archives of Cazenovia College, the Frederick and Jean Williams Archives, located in the basement of the library. And everything that I've talked about today is found in a book that I wrote a few years ago entitled Generations of Excellence. And I hope that you get a chance to take a look at that book and read. There's a lot more in there about the school, and a lot more in there that really foreshadows from all the way from the 1840s where this school is going and where it can go. It's a pleasure to think about the past of Cazenovia College because it does affect our present so much. And if history repeats itself, we're on our way to a strong and healthy 21st century.